Alrighty then. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 164. I am your host, pannobhasa, and if we're being completely honest here, I have to admit that 164 is 2 times 2 times 41. Not prime at all. Although 2 and 41, of course, are prime. This is my beverage. And we have kind of the normal amount of questions this time, which is kind of, in the low 20s now, which results in a 2-hour long Q&A video instead of a 3-hour long one, which some people prefer. So, with that as a kind of lame introduction, I'm just going to wade into answering questions here. And the first question is from Athena's Sigil. And Athena's Sigil says, why do you still identify as a Buddhist? And why is it so important still in your life? I ask this as you've mentioned that you're rather heterodox in some of your opinions, yet you still keep the faith. By the way, I recommend that to everyone too. Well, I guess I should start with this. Athena's Sigil saying that I've mentioned that I'm rather heterodox in some of my opinions, but heterodox doesn't necessarily mean non-Buddhist. It means like non-Theravada. Some of my interpretations of philosophy or of Dharma, they're more in agreement with other schools of Buddhism like Madhyamaka or some other Mahayana schools than with Theravada. So just being heterodox, especially for a Western Buddhist, is really being a member of the majority of Western Buddhists that, for example, have no use for Abhidhamma. Most Western Buddhists don't have much, if any, use for the third Pitaka. So, anyone capable of critical thought, just objectively looking at their own religion, not just with a heart full of faith where they want to just believe everything, but just with a capacity to look even at your own spiritual system with a certain amount of objective critical thought, a little bit of skepticism. It's pretty much inevitable that you're going to deviate from the hardline orthodox hardline. So, yeah, I do think that certain other schools of Buddhism were more correct in their interpretation of certain doctrines of early Buddhism, like Paticca Samuppada or dependent co-arising, for example. So, I really can't think of anything right offhand where I think that Buddhism is wrong and some other religion is right. I can't think of it. There might be some doctrine that I could really get on board with, say that the Christians are right on that and the Buddhists are wrong, but I just can't think of any. So, yeah, I'm not Orthodox Theravada, but still I am Buddhist. And so why do I still identify as a Buddhist? I think that the doctrines of Buddhism are for the most part correct. And even if they're not strictly speaking ultimate truth, still they are beneficial and useful if you follow them. They help you to purify the mind, cultivate wisdom, get closer to enlightenment. So let's see, why is it so important still in my life? Well, it's pretty much my working worldview. Not necessarily strict Orthodox Theravada, but generally speaking, a Buddhist point of view. It seems to be the wisest, I guess I could say most accurate interpretation of reality, not just of samsara. I think science may win the prize on the most accurate interpretation of just phenomenal samsara, not with regard to its source, its origins, anything like that, but just with regard to what happens in samsara. Science seems to be really good at that. within limits. But if you take in the entire scope of reality or of just human experience, including things that science doesn't deal with very well, like how to be happy, I think Buddhism is still the best, and to have some kind of worldview is necessary. I mean, there was a discussion on the Discord server last night, I think, or at least I didn't get around to reading it till last night, talking about metaphysics. And I point out that everybody has got a metaphysic. Even a dog or a chicken, they have the metaphysic of naive realism, or what sometimes is called common sense realism. That you just take everything at face value. That's still a metaphysic. So everyone has to choose some kind of metaphysic. You get common sense realism or naive realism just by default for being a vertebrate. But you can improve on that. And I do think that Buddhism is the best improvement that I've been exposed to. So let's see here. I guess I answered the question. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Boxcar Bob and his dog Comet. They must have collaborated on this question. And Boxcar Bob and his dog Comet say, my first Om memory was at the farm, and then in parentheses he's got TN, which I assume stands for Tennessee, along with Stephen Gaskin and friends during a week-long stay in 1976. I used low E on a guitar as my guiding tone. My question, is there a particular universal frequency that monks use or prefer to Om, and is any tone okay if you are alone? So, I'm unaware of any universal frequency or tone that monks prefer. It'd be mostly Hindu monks, I suppose, because the Hindus emphasize Om more than Buddhists do, especially more than Theravada Buddhists. In Mahayana Buddhism, there's more Om than in Theravada, possibly due to more Hindu or proto-Hindu like influence. So my personal opinion is, partly just because I'm unaware of there being any preferred tone, is just whatever comes natural. Just whatever comes natural to you is going to be more natural. So it'll just have more of a flow. It'll be less artificial, less constrained, I guess. And before I move on to the next question, I would just like to point out that I took a shower last night with the beard beads or the beard braids still in. And because it got wet, I slept with that way. It mutated into a kind of scorpion tail. I don't know if you can see it. So my sweetheart wanted me to take a shower, but I thought the scorpion tail really was kind of a nice effect. So I just refrained from taking a shower. But I'll take one later. No worries. And I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question here after showing off the scorpion tail beard braid one more time. And this is from HV20 Canon, which sounds like the name of a copy machine. I assume this is an actual human asking the question, though. And HV20 Canon says, knowing the cruelties that man had inflicted on each other throughout history and recently, oftentimes for no good reason, do you sometimes lose sleep over that? And I'm going to turn up the fan because it's very muggy here in South Carolina lately, because there's like extreme weather warnings out and there could be like a big storm hitting any time. But getting back to HV20 Canon's question, first of all, I've read a lot of history, and I know that the human race has always been this way. I've even read that, like, in the Stone Age, it appears that one of the main causes of death was intertribal violence. Just based on, like, skulls, broken skulls, and just gashed up bones that they have dug up. And to some degree, I'm just used to it. I had a macho father. He had actually killed people, although he did it legally as a soldier in wartime. But still, I mean, my father was just this macho alpha dad. And he just taught me, you got to have a certain amount of stoicism or like a Spartan mentality, even if you're nonviolent. I mean, it helps to have a certain amount of toughness and just objective acknowledgement of the way things are. And as a Buddhist, I'm living in this world because of my own karma. I have landed myself here because this is what fits my current state of development or whatever. But I can say the closest I've ever come that I can recall to losing sleep over man's inhumanity to man, so to speak, would be when I was living in a cave in Burma, and I'd be thinking, Burma is a military dictatorship, and I had been reported to the military secret police before on political charges just because someone didn't like me. They wanted to get me out of that monastery. And so sometimes I'd be lying there on my pallet in the cave thinking at any time military secret police could show up at the door of my cave, and what would I do? So, I mean, that would be the closest I've come to losing sleep over, human cruelty towards other humans. And the Burmese military secret police can be pretty damn cruel at times. In fact, there's a policy, I don't know if it works this way in America too, where you've got like the agents have to get moved around a lot. Because if they stay in one place long enough, they might start making friends and then not wanting to just like arrest somebody in the middle of the night and haul them into a torture chamber or interrogation or whatever. So let's see here. I guess I answered that question. Let's move on to the next one. This is from Romeo. And Romeo says, I read one of your books, Essays in Theravada Buddhism, and like your writing style, I was wondering if you could shed light on your creative process. Do you jot ideas down as they come to you and randomly throughout the day then revisit and coalesce them once you have some available leisure time? Or do you take a more disciplined approach and set a specific block of time to sit in front of your computer or notebook and force yourself to write regardless of whether or not you feel particularly inspired? Well, maybe Romeo hasn't noticed that I haven't done any significant writing in a few years. When I was a monk, I was a member of the leisure class, or as some more sophisticated folks might say, the leisure class. And so, I could just like be writing whenever I felt like it. Then after I stopped being a monk and started working for a living, it was like a weekend thing where I would just kind of force myself to just regularly, reliably put out a blog post every week. So that would be just me sitting in my room on a weekend, pretty much just kind of doing it just because it has to be done. But then these Q&A videos have taken the place of my blog writing on weekends, so that I haven't written a blog post in probably a couple years at this point, at least. So my answer is going to be pretty much in the past tense because I haven't been doing any significant writing lately. But the way it used to be is I'd get an idea, often while bathing for some reason, about something that would make, a good topic. And then I would just kind of let it digest in my mind. And I would just write down things I would be sure to mention. And so I just, in a way, just make a list of points that I wanted to be sure to mention. I didn't want to forget that. And then after, it had kind of digested or ripened in my mind, and I had like a sufficient number of points to cover, then I would arrange them into kind of like an outline. I used to hate making an outline when I was in school. Like a kid in school, they always tell you, make an outline before you write the essay. And I used to hate that, but it does make sense. And like the unit of any kind of essay or writing that I would do, like the unit is the paragraph. Each paragraph is like a discrete idea. And so, you want one idea to lead to the next idea, to lead to the next idea. You want a coherent like chain of association or chain of thought. and just write in the style that you would speak, except without the unnecessary ums and so's and bad grammar. It'd be more perfect. It'd be like the AI version. It's like one of the reasons that some YouTube video is done by AI is just the perfection with which they say everything, except for some unusual word. They'll just pronounce it completely wrong because it's just not in their vocabulary. So write the way you would speak, except, more polished, more grammatically correct manner. And there's one other thing. Oh yeah, always imagine like your most critical critic. It's like your most sort of adversarial critic, not necessarily like an emotional enemy, but someone who's likely to just pick to death what you say, looking over your shoulder while you're writing. Just kind of always keep in mind that people aren't just going to accept what you say just because you say it, that you need to really form like a coherent argument. That's not going to necessarily work so well if you're writing fiction, although even in fiction, you still have to have people remaining in character and verisimilitude, people, just things happening the way they would naturally happen, unless you're deliberately writing about something unnatural. So let's see. I think I pretty much just answered that question here. So I would jot down ideas and then jot down sub-ideas under the ideas. And then once I get a large enough number of them, form them into like groups, which would represent paragraphs in like a coherent sequence. And then write the way you would speak in just normal English. Try to avoid using words that you don't use normally, like explicate. Who the hell says explicate unless they're writing? Just say explain. And just always imagine you've got critics that are reading what you are writing. Oop, just hit the computer with my beverage. So I guess I'll just move on to Romeo's next question. He says, do you have any general writing tips for a budding writer? And that's kind of funny because I've written and published 3 books thus far, and I don't make nearly as much. I don't make nearly enough money from them. It's just barely putting any kind of dent in my income. I still have to work for a living driving a forklift. So I guess general writing tips for a budding writer, aside from just how to write relatively well. I was getting compliments on my writing back when I was in school. And just business-wise, just do the opposite of what I've done. Like, try to get an agent, try to get published by some big-name publisher. If you can't manage that, go to Amazon, or if you just don't want to bother with that, you can just self-publish on Amazon or some such. But, with regard to being a professional writer, a writer that really, is like out there for lots and lots of people, then I assume you'd go back to the old-fashioned kind of maybe having an agent and just trying to send your manuscripts to big-name publishers. But I'm just not the right person to give advice on how to be a successful professional writer. In my own case, I'm just putting stuff out there as a kind of public service, and if it's hard to find, most people that might like it don't ever see it. I just kind of chalk that up to, the cosmic order and karma and so forth. I really can't put myself out there. I'm not good at hyping myself. When I was a monk, I came back to America like 2011, just trying to live as a free-range Buddhist monk, not like pinned down to a monastery or something, just kind of floating out there. And numerous supporters in all good faith are just saying, you got to put yourself out there, you got to sell yourself. And I just do not operate that way. I'm just kind of indifferent to that. So, yeah, my general writing tip for a budding writer would be get advice with regard to making a living from someone besides me, because otherwise you're going to be writing in your spare time and making your real money driving a forklift. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Master Poe. And Master Poe says, have you ever watched the Yuri Bezmenov interview from 1984? Former KGB agent that defected. He's got deflected here, but I'm pretty sure he means defected. It's worth a visit if you want to understand what's going on in the USA. Interesting. I have seen clips of the Yuri Bezmenov interview. I think my brother sent them to me because he was really black-pilled about politics from early age. And yeah, I mean, a lot of like the woke stuff that is occurring now is like the towering oak tree from acorns that were planted by Soviet agents back in the 1970s and 80s. So it is kind of ironic that the efforts of the KGB finally came to fruition after the Soviet Union had already collapsed. But I guess Russia and the United States are still fairly adversarial. It's too bad, too, really. I think the United States and Russia could be allies, maybe even against a common enemy, like China, for example. Not necessarily enemy in the military sense, but at least in the economic sense, certainly in the cultural sense. The United States and Russia have much more in common culturally than the United States and China do, or Russia and China, for that matter. But yeah, Yuri Bezmenov was essentially just talking about how bad ideas were being like distributed throughout the culture in America by the Soviet Union, just as a way of undermining it. And now it's like the platform of the Democratic Party, or like the second most important aspect of the Democratic Party after just hating the president's guts. So let's see. Yeah, I have watched. That's the only question here is, have I ever watched the Yuri Bezmenov interview? And I have watched like large clips of it, several minute-long clips. So I think I'm just going to move on to this question. This is from Cleefy. And Cleefy says, I got to check, see if we're recording. Yeah, I guess we are. Cleefy says, could you expand on what you mean by trust Dharma? That's kind of a weird question. It seems like it's straight to the point, but it's kind of ambiguous at the same time. Expand on what I mean by trust Dharma. And I'm not exactly sure where he heard me say trust Dharma, unless it's like, if you protect Dhamma, Dhamma protects you, that kind of thing. In that case, there's numerous angles that you could try to explain that if you have faith, or, it's, the Christians put more emphasis on this than the Buddhists do. I think it's like, God will provide. Consider the lilies of the field. Consider the sparrows. Something about sparrows, or let's see, what was the other one? Give no thought for tomorrow, what you will eat, where you will sleep, that kind of thing. It's there in Buddhism too, but it received a bit more emphasis in early Christianity, and it really does. If you can do it, if you can just like cast yourself upon the mercy of the universe, they'll actually help you. It's like all of a sudden I'm reminded of this story that's at the beginning of Illusions by, is it Richard Bach? The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. And there's this story at the beginning that apparently was written by this reluctant Messiah, David Shimoda, where there's these little animals that live in a stream, and they cling to the water plants. And it's like it it's very important to them that they cling to these plants because they're sure that if they let go, they're just going to get washed away and die. So one of these little animals finally gets the idea, I'm just going to let go of this plant and see what happens. And so at first, the current just kind of knocks them against the rocks. This is what the animals believed, is you let go, you're going to get knocked against the rocks, and then if you don't die, you're just going to get washed away and never seen again. So he lets go, and of course, he gets knocked against the rocks at the bottom of the stream for a little bit, and then the current lifts him up, and he's just flowing down the stream. And then the little animals downstream see one of their own kind apparently like flying past them, and they think he's some kind of Messiah or supernatural being, and he's saying all he did was just let go of the plants, and they're like, no, that's impossible. You let go of the plants, you're just gonna get hit against the rocks and die or just get washed away. And he's saying, no, I did it. So in a way, trusting Dharma is like that. You just let go, and it's like the universe protects you. Krishnamurti had this similar idea about you got some gardener who has this garden full of flowers, and one of the flowers is unusual. There's some kind of mutation. It's just like this new strain or something. It's not like all the other flowers. So the gardener is going to give special care to that flower because it's unusual. And he says, people are the same way. If you are like unusual in that sort of way, then it's like the forces of the universe, the gods, or whatever you want to call it, is sort of give you special attention and take care of you more than everyone else. So I assume Khalifi isn't asking me in particular, like trusting Buddhism. I mean, I kind of addressed that in like the very first question or the second one. Let's see. Let's look up here and see. Yeah, very first question. So trusting Dharma just is in like looking at the world through a spiritual lens, or just interpreting your experience along spiritual lines, in a way is trusting Dhamma. And just from your own personal experience, you can see that it is to your advantage to live that way. That if you're just like completely trapped, I'm reminded of this guy at work. He's a hell of a nice guy. I'm not trying to badmouth this guy at all, but he is just locked into samsara. I mean, everything is just real, and he takes it completely seriously. I mean, he can joke, but he takes the joke seriously too. It's just, this is reality. And I don't know, I just kind of feel sorry for him sometimes because he is just locked in, like it's like hyper samsaric mode, even though he's a really nice guy and all. So, yeah, I mean, if you can separate yourself, just detach, I mean, that in itself is just a blessing to your life. Then something icky arises. Let's say hatred arises in your mind. Then, I mean, the person who's just locked in is like, I hate. Whereas if you have some detachment, then you can observe hate is arising, and then you can choose to just acknowledge it as, hate that is arising, a mental state is arising, and then that's it. Or just knowing the second noble truth. The most important thing about Buddhism you could possibly know from a practical point of view, that whenever you are unhappy, it's because you desire something. You are clinging to something. So, I mean, that's not even really so much trust as just a kind of empiricism. You could trust empiricism on that one, I guess. But just sort of having faith in God from like the Christian point of view, where you just sell all that you have, give the money to the poor, and just wander. Like Peace Pilgrim, that little old lady that just took off walking, and God provided, or whatever Christians call God provided. And that's important. It takes real bravery to do that. I mean, a lot of people, they want to have like a safety net, a safety line, just to make sure. But really, from the spiritual point of view, early Buddhism and early Christianity is just have faith and God will provide, or Dharma will provide. And if you can really do that, it works. You get exactly what you need. Exactly what you need might not be particularly pleasant, but still you get exactly what you need. And I expanded a little bit, I guess. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Scholadin or Schooladeen, who used to ask questions a lot, but he's kind of tapered off. He's not as question-asky as he used to be. And Scholadin or Schooladeen says, would you kindly explain fear of the unknown? I find that people are easily startled when confronted with something they didn't know existing abruptly. Well, I mean, fear of the unknown technically would be xenophobia. And it's not xenophobia as bandied around in political circles where it's just hatred of foreigners, that sort of thing. I mean, that would be like one kind of xenophobia. But xenophobia is common throughout higher vertebrates. You know, it's just a survival trait. So it's just built into us, possibly even hardwired into us, that we have a certain distrust of the unusual. And because the unusual can be dangerous. I mean, what you're used to, I mean, you either know that it's not dangerous, or if you're used to it and it is dangerous, at least you know that it's dangerous and in what ways it can be dangerous. But something that's completely unknown, then it just triggers this instinctive animal alarm in us, the way it triggers instinctive animal alarm in a chicken or a deer. It's just built into us, just Darwinian. People that had xenophobia were more likely to survive, or just our ancestors, our pre-human ancestors that had a kind of xenophobia were more likely to survive. Just caution and wariness around the unusual just makes sense. But then there are certain kinds of xenophobia or fear of the unknown that really, I mean, I can relate to that. It's like if I'm sitting here and all of a sudden this cup just starts levitating, and it's not like doing anything dangerous. It's just like floating in midair, just like that. Then, I mean, I would be alarmed, and just that would be like one of the first reactions. I mean, possibly the first one is, how the hell is that happening? Is there something lifting it up? And then when you see that nothing's lifting it up, then there's like this alarm. I remember reading, I think it was Ambrose Bierce story about this guy who he's looking out the window and he sees this clump of trees, and one of the trees is different from the other one in a way he can't explain. And he just feels alarmed just from that until he realizes that it was a small tree closer up against bigger trees farther away, and they all looked about the same size. So that at first he thought it was just this little clump of trees, but one of the trees was like the focus was different or something. And I mean, just that can cause a certain amount of alarm in people. Just anything that you can't explain, anything you don't have an answer for, that can be dangerous. And so you have these animal instincts that just all of a sudden kick in, and you are in this state of at least yellow alert. And it makes sense. I mean, it does have survival value. So let's see. Scholadin or Schooladeen says, I find that people are easily startled when confronted with something they didn't know existing abruptly. Yeah, it's animal instinct, and it works the same in chickens and deers as it does in humans. Probably fish have this also. Just any kind of vertebrate, any kind of vertebrate or chordate that is conscious enough that it has like perceptions and awareness, like an internal visual image of what it's experiencing, that kind of thing, then they're going to have xenophobia. It's just built in. So I'm just going to move on to Scholadin's next question. Would you kindly explain how people can have such a lack of presence? I think I already kindly did. You know, it's just built into us as an animal instinct in the human animal. And there's, of course, all kinds of different shades. I mean, the levitating coffee mug would be like fairly extreme at one end, and then just like not trusting foreigners or being suspicious about foreigners. I mean, that's sort of more subtle, but it's the same phenomenon of xenophobia. Chimpanzees are xenophobic just as humans are xenophobic. Not to mention chickens and fish, or fishes. So, I think I'll just move on to Skuladin or Skuladine's next question, which is, would you kindly give your expert opinion on Nowhere Man? And I assume what he means by Nowhere Man is the song by the Beatles, which is in their movie Yellow Submarine. Good movie, by the way. And so, let's see. Nowhere Man, I mean, it's just kind of like this optimistic, feel-good, hippie kind of song about how sort of alienated NPC type normies, they're not living up to their full potential. They're just kind of closed off and like self-limiting. And so, Nowhere Man, please listen. You don't know what you're missing. Nowhere Man, the world is at your command. It's kind of a little bit of spirituality added to it. It's just your potential is just beyond your comprehension. You just got to open up to the possibilities, be more open, have less of Pink Floyd's Wall, if you don't mind me bringing up a different rock group. So, I mean, it's fairly straightforward, I think. I don't think that there's any any kind of subtle profundity, although there is some profundity in just, not being alienated and closed off and being open to all the infinite possibilities, that kind of thing. But I think it was pretty standard for like hippie music in those days to have that kind of a theme anyway. Let's see. I think Nowhere Man was like the only Beatles song I knew all the words to. I'm not going to sing it though. So anyways, also I should say, maybe this is why Skuladin or Skuladine asked the question. One time, before I became a monk, I was a monastery attendant. Started already shaving my head, wearing like white robes. I guess it's called pakao in Thailand, an anagarika. And I was in the kitchen washing dishes, and I'm just kind of passing the time, not being particularly mindful. I was just trying to think of what Beatles song would represent each person at the monastery. And for myself, I gave Nowhere Man. So I was trying to follow the Beatles' advice and become more open and so forth. There was one kind of abrasive Jewish guy who lived there. His theme song was Happiness is a Warm Gun. And I don't even remember. I think it was the abbot had that one, nothing's gonna change my world. But anyways, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Austin. And Austin says, Sikhs hold that killing may be justified in the defense of life and the upholding of justice. They teach that if such an act is carried out with a mind free from lust, anger, attachment, and pride, it does not give rise to negative karma. If karma is mental intention, then under this view, could killing be justified? ? Because the act isn't coming from anger or ego, but from alignment with hukam, or divine order. In that case, it wouldn't carry the usual karmic weight of violent, ego-driven action. Well, this kind of reminds me of like the samurai interpretation of Zen Buddhism. It's like if you kill, it's going to be through honor and duty. There's going to be no anger, no hatred at all. Like the story I've told more than once, you got the samurai master has a disciple. And this samurai master, it's sort of like gunslingers in the Wild West. Everyone wants to duel a samurai master because if you win the duel, you are famous. You're the guy who defeated the master. So some young samurai challenges the samurai master to a duel, and he kills the samurai master. So then this disciple, this student of the samurai master, it's his duty to avenge the death of his master. So he finds this young samurai who killed his master and challenges him to a duel. And so they're sword fighting, and the disciple of the deceased master has his opponent down on the ground on his back. He's getting ready to finish him off, and the defeated samurai just spits in his face, just in defiance. And so this pisses off the guy. He's really going to get him now. And then he realizes, whoa, I'm not motivated by honor and duty anymore. Now I'm pissed off and I want to kill him because of that. So he does the honorable thing. He just gets up, stands up, sheathes his sword, and walks away. Because if he couldn't kill him due to purely as a result of honor and duty, then it was no go. But still, it doesn't really work that way. Like I've had people say, well, sociopaths, they don't have any they don't have any conscience. It's like they can kill somebody in the same way that they peel an apple. It's like they don't have these negative mental states, but still a sociopath. I mean, just setting aside the ones that just get this uncontrollable urge to do horrible things to a prostitute, that still, subconsciously, you are still aware. Everyone has a certain amount of empathy that, we're all mental states are contagious, and to some degree, we're all connected. Like consciousness is just consciousness. It's not like I'm generating completely different consciousness from the next guy. It's all like this sea of consciousness, and we are sort of manipulating our area of consciousness, so to speak. It's just a cluster of waves on the surface of the water. There's a different cluster of waves on the surface of the same water that is self-identifying as somebody else. And I'm reifying the absolute, which is a no-no for Buddhists, but I'm trying to get the point across that really, even if you are detached, especially if you're not enlightened yet, but you're like a sociopath, or you're like this well-trained warrior who just acts according to duty and honor, doesn't take any enjoyment in killing. It's just your job. It's your Dharma from like the point of view of the Bhagavad Gita. Still, to the extent that, especially if you're not enlightened, then at a subconscious level, you're harming yourself at the same time as you're harming the other person. That, at a subconscious level, like at a subliminal level, that you are inflicting fatal agony on somebody else, and it's going to have its effects. You're doing it, and it's going to, every action is going to have this result. So, a person who is killing like a samurai sword master, or this alleged Sikh that Austin is bringing up, that they'll probably be creating less bad karma than someone who just goes berserk. But still, it's not completely neutral. It's still you're causing harm, and that harm is, it's sort of permeating or infiltrating into your own subconscious mind at the very least. Even if at the conscious level, like with a sociopath, they're oblivious. And that's one of my theories about sociopaths, is they're just cut off from their subconscious mind. It's still all kinds of shit going on down there. They're just clueless. That's one reason why they don't feel compassion. This compassion, or like empathy, is coming from a deeper level of consciousness that they have just shut off for whatever reasons. So let's see, what is the actual question? If karma is mental intention, then under this view, could killing be justified? Not from a Buddhist point of view. Certainly killing cannot be justified from any point of view. Although, there's like the elephant look. It's like this controversial thing that's found in the Pali Suttas, where you've got some evil person and the Buddha will give him the elephant look. And according to, it's called the elephant look because he doesn't just turn his head to look at somebody. He turns his entire body to look at the person, and then the person just dies. It's like the ground opens up and they plunge into hell. And, there's some people say, well, he's doing that. In a way, he's killing that person, but there's like this subtle thing where, the person is, it's not like the Buddha's deliberately killing anybody kind of a thing. So I'm not exactly sure why I brought up the elephant look, but in a way it is kind of, sort of like enlightened killing. But the orthodox interpretation is no, the Buddha doesn't kill anybody, that it's just sort of like this cosmic coincidence kind of a thing. Maybe the Buddha is just turning around to look at them right as they die, just because they've done something so egregious that they're just going to plunge into hell in the next second anyway. It's kind of this weird thing, and it may be just sort of like a legendary thing that did not occur historically, for all I know. Or also there's like the story of Padmasambhava, who's dancing on a flat roof and kicks a rock off the roof, and it falls off the roof and hits somebody in the head down below and kills them. And Padmasambhava, it's just karma. You know, he didn't do it on purpose. It was just, and he didn't feel any guilt, no remorse, no apologies. It's just, that's just the way it goes. So you're going one step beyond that when you're actually deliberately killing someone. Even if you think you can do it with complete detachment, I think only an arahant could possibly be completely detached. And even then, there's a good chance, I mean, it's highly unlikely that they'd be going around killing people on purpose. So I guess the answer to this is, if mental karma is mental intention, then under this view, could killing be justified? Well, you can justify anything. You know, the sociopathic serial killer truck drivers that are killing lot lizards across the country, they justify it. You know, Jack the Ripper was probably justifying what he was doing. People that were like Nazi Germany, soldiers that were like lining up people and machine gunning them after forcing them to dig their own trench mass grave, they justified it. I mean, everyone justifies what they do. That doesn't mean that it's right. Just because you can justify something. They're not trying to pick on psychopathic truck drivers or Nazi soldiers either. Just trying to give some examples that people can kind of relate to or understand. So the next question is kind of a follow-up on this one, even though it's by somebody else. So I think I'll just move on to that one. This is from Cherzaskaziz. And Cherzaskaziz says, what would happen in terms of karma if we appointed an arahant to be the executor or executioner of death penalty for convicted murderers? Well, let's say the government has some way of deciding who is enlightened and who isn't. And then they're just going to contact these enlightened people and say, would any of you be willing to be the official executioner for people who have been sentenced to death? You know, you got to give the lethal injection or flip the switch on the electric chair or whatever. I seriously doubt that any arahants would be willing to kill somebody. I'm not on purpose. I mean, they could be Padmasambhava dancing on a roof and kicking a rock loose, or the Buddha giving the elephant look. But still, I've never heard of any case of a fully enlightened being just deliberately killing people, even if they're like vicious murderers. Like vicious murderer, serial killer Angulimala. Did the Buddha kill him? No. He converted him to Buddhism, and then Angulimala became a devout practicing Buddhist and eventually became enlightened. So, of course, the best way to destroy an enemy is to turn him into a friend, if possible. Or just avoid the enemy if he's just couldn't make a friend. And I just noticed I got one mandible sticking out farther than the other ones. Oh, well. You guys that just listen to the podcast and don't watch the video aspects do have certain advantages. You don't see me all disheveled in my bathrobe. Custom made in Lithuania out of 100% natural linen. It's really a nice robe. So I guess those of you who do see the video at least have certain advantages over the people that listen to the podcast, because you can see the robe. You also see the kind of asymmetrical facial hair and so forth, but there's give and take on this. So Cherzaska's question, what would happen in terms of karma if we appointed an arahant to be the executor of death penalty for committing murders, they probably would decline. They'd say, nah, I don't want to do that. I'm pretty sure that would be what would happen. Although arahants, it's problematical. I mean, you can't really prove that anybody is an arahant. There's that Dignaga school. It was like a medieval school of Buddhist logicians in northern India who had as their classic case of a problematic premise that any being is fully enlightened, because there's just no way you can prove it one way or the other. I mean, maybe you could give some fairly good evidence that someone isn't an arahant or isn't fully enlightened because you just saw them screaming in rage at somebody, or like tripping an old lady and then giggling about it, that kind of thing. But to prove that somebody is an arahant, I don't know, it's sort of like proving that Bigfoot doesn't exist. You know, it's like you cannot prove an absence very easily. You know, you can't prove that Bigfoot doesn't exist, and you can't prove that that this person has zero defilements. So, yeah, but I think if the government could find an arahant and did try to recruit them to be an executioner, that the arahant would just say, no, thank you, I'm not interested. And you shouldn't be killing people anyway. That would be my guess. So I'm just going to move on to Cherzaskaz's second question, which is as follows. Do you think it is more difficult to drop from monkhood after 20 or 30 years now than it was in the 20th century and in any century before? I mean, now people are born with smartphone in one hand and laptop in second, and world didn't seem to change all that fast. I don't know. I mean, it might be somebody's interest to do a statistical survey, to do a statistical analysis of this phenomenon, but I really don't think that there's all that much difference. Maybe if, yeah, I really don't think it's all that much difference, because, I mean, a monk's main reason for dropping out of the monkhood is not necessarily like the internet. But now that right when I was in the middle of that sentence, I do realize that in Burma, when internet first came out, there was like this mass disrobing. You know, there was like this pandemic of young monks, especially disrobing because they were getting access to pornography and also like communicating privately with women for the first time in their lives. So it just caused a lot of monks that really did not have a true vocation to just drop out. So there is that, but that would make it easier for monks to drop out of the monkhood, not more difficult. But still, like, human nature remains human nature, and like a monk who's just living alone in a hut or a cave or something, you know, it's going to be the same now as it was 1,500 years ago with regard to the likelihood of staying in robes and so forth. So I think, if anything, it would be easier to disrobe now just because of this seventh sense organ we have acquired relatively recently as humans, which is internet. You know, it's like your computer or smartphone is like the sense organ itself, and the internet information coming through is just sort of the sensory input coming through that sense organ. You know, in a way, it's like a step towards omniscience that most people just don't have the wisdom to really navigate very wisely. And so some people can just be destroyed by it. But I don't think it's more difficult to drop from the monkhood now than it was in the 20th century. If anything, it's easier just because there's more distractions, especially if you're like surfing the web all the time. So I'm just going to move on to Cherzaskaz's third question. Please tell us about hot chocolate in the evening at Wat Pa Nanachat. If it is without milk, is it in accordance with Vinaya rules? Well, this is there's a member of the Discord server who is intending to be ordained at Wat Pa Nanachat in Thailand, which is the main international, or it's like a monastery particularly for foreign monks. Nanachat is the Thai sort of corruption of Nanajata, which means like different birth or different ethnicity. So it's the forest monastery for foreigners, essentially, is like the name of the place. So it's like the main monastery in the Ajahn Chah tradition in Thailand that has lots of Western monks ordained there. And I told him be careful about the hot chocolate in the afternoon or in the evening, because I've been told, I've never been to Wat Pah Nanachat. I've met several monks, lots of monks that have spent time there. And there was one Indonesian monk who's telling me about, man, they really like the hot chocolate there, and the dark chocolate too. I mean, they eat dark chocolate in the afternoon, going with this idea that chocolate is just a congealed liquid. So it's like drinking hardened juice. And it just seems kind of like casuistry. Is that a word? Casuistry? Just sort of justifying whatever you're doing, like eating cheese in the afternoon. They probably got cheese there too. On this cart, it's probably cheese and chocolate, hot cocoa. And I mean, in Burma, like cheese especially, it's just not controversial. I mean, the word for cheese in Burma literally translates as hard curd or hardened curd, and which is what it is. Cheese is like purified curd. You take curd and you squeeze the excess whey out of it, and maybe add a little bit of like bacterial or fungal culture. And it's got more curd in it than what is called curd. It's a kind of purified curd. It's more curd than curd is, but Thai forest tradition has declared that it's okay to eat cheese in the afternoon. And Ajahn Thanisaro, actually, in his first Vinaya book, went to the extreme, it seems to me, of implying that maybe, just maybe, cheese is actually a kind of butter, and butter is allowable in the afternoon. And I think that the chocolate is similar. I mean, I wouldn't eat it if I was a monk. I never ate dark chocolate afternoon when I was a monk. I never ate cheese afternoon as a monk either. I mean, in Burma, it's just not controversial. You just don't do it. Any monk that would eat cheese in the afternoon would also eat rice and curry in the afternoon. And there's plenty of those. And then the hot cocoa, they justify that because they, instead of putting milk in the hot cocoa, they use like a non-dairy creamer. But the non-dairy creamer is made from milk. It's like one of the main ingredients in this non-dairy creamer stuff is casein, which is milk protein. So, yeah, if I was there, I probably would just avoid the goodies cart in the afternoon. And this Indonesian monk was actually saying they pass it around 3 times. So if you don't get your fill the first 2 times, you can still get more on the 3rd time around. So it's fairly luxurious there, I think. It didn't used to be. Like in the 1970s, back when like Ajahn Sumedho was there, then it was still rough. It was still fairly ascetic. Not so much now because it's famous and lots of lay people want to support the Western monks. And so if you're not careful, you can get spoiled rotten fairly easily. So let's see here. Yeah, milk chocolate is out because it's got milk in it, but having milk protein in the cocoa is fine. And of course, milk protein is like one of the main ingredients in the cheese too. So I guess milk protein is considered not to be on the list of foods. So let's see here. I guess I answered that question. Let's move on to the next question. This is from the Xenothoid. And Xenothoid is curious about David Hume, I guess, because he's got 2 questions about David Hume. First one is, what do you think of Schopenhauer's critique of Hume on causation? I like his idea that when I kick a rock, the missing link between my foot and the rock is will, and that this extends to events between physical objects as well. Okay, well, David Hume actually addresses this, that Schopenhauer didn't accept Hume's covering of this issue, but it's like David Hume was saying that we can't really know cause and effect. All we know is that A follows B or B follows A consistently. So we just get the idea that A causes B. And so, I mean, he says that even with regard to our own mental states, I mean, you experience the volition or the will to pick up the coffee mug, and then you pick up the coffee mug. But still, you don't actually experience any causative force necessarily. You just have the will to do it, which is followed by you doing it. And David Hume wasn't saying that there is no cause and effect. He's just saying that we have no direct knowledge of cause and effect, that it is a kind of inference. So, yeah, Schopenhauer's idea that when you kick a rock, the missing link between the foot and the rock is will, Hume already addressed that and just said, I mean, really, you do not experience causative force. You feel the will to do something and then you do it, but still it's just another A-B. It's another B following A scenario. That's what Hume says. But I do remember from Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation, his main counterexample to Hume's argument that we just see B following A until we just assume that A causes B. Schopenhauer's counter example is night and day. That he says we see night following day, every day, but we don't say that day causes night. So that's a fairly good, at least it's a sufficient counterexample that we don't attribute just regular succession, like repeated succession of A and B, as being necessarily A causing B. Because night follows day, and we don't think that day causes night, or at least most people don't. So let's see. So I do think that Schopenhauer did bring up a valid counterexample to Hume, but it could still be that Hume is correct. That, we don't necessarily in every case say that A causes B if A comes before B on a regular, just regularly in our experience. But still, that is, according to Hume, why we believe in cause and effect, because we don't just subjectively experience causative force. So let's see here. I think I answered that question. So I'm going to move on to Xenothoid's next David Hume question, which is, please, I guess it's not a question, there's no question mark. Please give your opinion on Alex O'Connor's critique of Hume's understanding of imagination. And then he left a video link with timestamp 1 hour, 10 minutes, and 10 seconds. So Alex O'Connor in this video is talking about David Hume, talking about imagination, how, according to David Hume, we can't imagine anything that we've never experienced. We can reconstruct things. Like, for example, you have dreams all the time, or at least I do, of people you've never met in real life. It's like your subconscious imagination, your dreaming imagination is just sort of taking various components of, at least according to Hume, taking various components of, different people, noses, eyes, skin colors, and so forth, and just creating a new person. But according to David Hume, that really like a blind person who has been blind from birth, who has no way of objectively experiencing colors, I guess subjectively experiencing colors, they wouldn't be able to imagine colors. That a person who's deaf from birth can't imagine sounds, according to David Hume, because you have to experience that in order to imagine something even similar to that, which is composed of components of things that you've already experienced. I think he calls that fancy, where you're just reassembling different things that you've already experienced to create something seemingly new, but the components of it aren't new. You've had to experience all of it before somehow. So then Alex O'Connor in the video is talking about how David Hume himself came up with a counterexample. And the counterexample is you've got the missing shade of blue. Blue is a convenient color here. That, let's say there's a person who's seen every shade of blue except maybe this one little wavelength they've never experienced, but still they could imagine kind of an unbroken spectrum of different shades of blue, so that they could kind of fill in the gap by sort of compromising between the slightly lighter shade of blue and the slightly darker shade of blue, so that they could imagine this shade of blue that they've never actually seen before. Which would be kind of rare nowadays, because we see all these spectrums of, blue kind of, you see the spectrum. So you see the full spectrum of blue. But somehow, like hypothetically, if someone has not seen a certain color, but they have seen like slightly lighter shade and slightly darker shade of that same general color, they could sort of imagine that color that they've never seen before. That was David Hume's counterexample. And Alex O'Connor just kind of, in a way, was using that as a way of just being skeptical of Hume's entire idea that you can't really imagine something that you've never experienced before, except like Hume's counterexample, which is just a slight deviation, because you have experienced almost exactly the same kind of blue. But someone who is blind from birth would not be able to do that same thing, because they haven't experienced any blue. So I think Hume may be correct from my own experience. I have indulged in what Hume calls fancy, which is just taking things you have experienced and just making something like new at like a higher level, even though its basic building blocks are all things you've experienced before, like different colors, different sounds, different facial features, that kind of thing. So, yeah, Alex O'Connor was saying, well, Hume just contradicted himself blatantly, but in a way he kind of didn't, because he's the one that brought up the counterexample to his own theory. But it was just really kind of a very nitpicky kind of counterexample that I think Hume may be correct. That particular aspect of Hume's philosophy doesn't really cause me to have a lower opinion of Hume, although certain other things like his imagination, his interpretation of how do we do this? Of like an impression, like sensory data, he's talking about how is sensory data, like you actually seeing something different from just imagining something. And he says that it's more vivid. But then he uses that exact same argument with regard to belief and non-belief. That if you believe something, then it's more vivid than if it's just like some random thought that isn't really attached to anything. And that, I think, is kind of a defect, because he's using the exact same definition for two entirely different processes. At least, according to him, they're different processes. You've got like the sensory impression, and then you've got belief that have the same definition. They're both livelier, I think was his word, or more vivid than if it's just some casual thing. But I remember coming up with my own idea that any perception is belief. That it's just seems more vivid if you actually believe that something is real, because it's like you're integrating it with all the other things that you think are real, so that kind of reinforces it. Whereas just this image of a unicorn is going to be very different from you looking directly at a horse or believing that horses exist. And then there's another thing about David Hume I don't like so much, is he was a product of the 18th century Scottish Enlightenment. And he was he was definitely anti-Christian. But he couldn't just come out and declare himself a non-Christian, because that would just be social suicide. He was a member of the gentry. I think his elder brother was a lord. And, he was hobnobbing with, the rich and famous. And he was effectively ambassador to France at one time. He was sort of like assistant ambassador to France, but when the ambassador was gone, he had like moved on to something else, and the new ambassador hadn't been installed yet. Hume was de facto the ambassador to France. And so he was, he was like of the upper classes. And for him to come out as a non-Christian at that time, he had already lost some really good career opportunities just from being declared an atheist, because that's the way it rolled back then. But he was anti-Christian. He just thought Christianity was just foolish superstition, that philosophy, like empirical philosophy, like science, should take the place of Christianity and we'd be living in a better world. Although that's kind of questionable. There's definitely pluses and minuses to atheistic scientism taking the place of Christianity. So anyways, because Scotland and England were no longer Catholic, he could bash away at Catholics, which is generally what he did. And so his bashing of Christianity would take the form of bashing Catholicism mainly. Whereas really, it was pretty obvious that like his arguments in his books were mainly arguments against Christianity. Like, for example, he tries to argue against any argument used by Christians to support the existence of God, like miracles. Just miracles is something Jehovah's Witnesses will still do it today. It's just they're looking at, just look at the miracles. That's one of their ways of justifying that Jesus was the Messiah and so forth. Look at the miracles. And so David Hume has this entire chapter in, I think it's an inquiry into human understanding, where he's saying essentially, and it makes sense, that you should believe in a miracle only if the falseness of the story would be more miraculous than the miracle itself. But the reason why he throws that in was just making another like underhanded jab at Christianity. And he makes lots and lots of them in his inquiry into human understanding. In a way, it was like an anti-Christian text disguised as some relatively deep philosophy. It was both, essentially. But his imagination, his understanding of imagination, according to Alex O'Connor, I think that was kind of like a nitpicky kind of argument against Hume. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rakasa. And Rakasa says, your usual advice when asked about dealing with unskillful emotions or thoughts is note it and let it go. Classic mindfulness. What is your general opinion of Orthodox Theravada's liking for counter meditations, metta to counter hate, asubha to counter lust, etc.? Well, my experience is that they generally don't work very well. Like, I knew this young American monk who was trying to combat lust by imagining rotting female corpses, like swarming with maggots and this kind of thing. And my experience with this sort of thing, both in myself and in others, is that it doesn't work very well. In a way, you're just struggling against it, which reinforces what you're struggling against. So definitely just mindfulness. Like, anger arises, you note the anger and let it go, which sort of denatures the anger and it stops it from having as much reinforcing power to the karma. It's not adding to the anger karma. If you just note it and let it go, then it just dissipates. And to that extent, the momentum of this angry mind is dissipated to that degree. But like metta meditation, I've never really liked metta meditation. I'm not a particularly metta-oriented human. I'm more head-oriented than heart-oriented. And I experience metta, but it has to be spontaneous. I can't just turn it off and on like a faucet. It's like when you're beaming metta in this direction and beaming metta in that direction and beaming metta in that direction, beaming metta at the higher beings, beaming metta at the lower beings, beaming metta at fellow humans, just on and on and on. It's like this cookbook method of just generating loving kindness or friendliness or benevolence or love, whatever you want to call it. And for me, it just doesn't work. Or the main argument or the main meditation for combating lust is the 32 parts of the body. But I'm a biologist, or at least I was trained as a biologist, I have a degree in biology, and to me the human body is just like a miracle in engineering. I've seen autopsies, and I mean, wasn't really grossed out by it. It was fascinating. So, yeah, just my experience is that the counter meditations, where you're like meditating on the opposite of the problem, in a way, it's sort of, I mean, for some people it may work. I mean, it's been in the tradition for over 2,000 years. So it must work for some people. It just never worked that well for me. And seeing other people do these things, I was not impressed by the results. Someone who's just got a lot of love in their heart might be drawn to metta meditation just because it's so easy for them, that kind of thing. But like an angry, hateful person who does metta meditation, they're essentially dissociating. I knew this one woman in Burma who, she had to be feuding with someone all the time. It was like, she'd just be bored climbing the walls if she didn't have somebody to be fighting with. And one time she was bragging to me about how she does metta meditation every morning. And I pointed out, well, if you're sending metta to all beings, you're also sending metta to this guy you've been feuding with for the past few weeks. And she just flares up and says, no, not him. And it's just, it's like make-believe. They're pretending to send metta to all beings. And then you have like this warm, glowy feeling that makes you think that it's working, but it's just a warm, glowy feeling, and you're not really sending metta to all beings. So definitely classic mindfulness is more effective, in my opinion, than trying to counteract some defilement by meditating on the opposite, or using any kind of counter force sort of meditation. It may work for some people. It's just that it seems fairly obvious to me that classic mindfulness works better. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Dharma River. And Dharma River says, of all the teachings of the Buddha, including all suttas, what percentage would you say was legitimately taught by the Buddha, and what percentage was added later by other sources, such as deceptive political rulers seeking to manipulate people into submission, or just monks seeking personal gain, or even innocently not being able to remember the teachings correctly, etc.? Well, I've discussed this to some depth previously. I wrote an entire essay on it way back before I even started. This was after I started doing a blog, but it was too long to put on the blog, I guess. What did the Buddha really teach? That was the name of the essay that I wrote. And I point out that, first of all, let me address this part before I get into the main answer. Let's see, what percentage was added later by other sources, such as deceptive political rulers seeking to manipulate people into submission. That's like atheists, one of their main arguments against religion in general is that it's devised by deceptive political rulers seeking to manipulate people into submission. I've had people say that about Buddhism too, just by pointing out, look, the Buddha, he was of the political class. There you go. He was trying to control people, trying to keep people in submission. But I just don't see much of that in Buddhism. Maybe in like later forms of Buddhism, like medieval Japanese Buddhism, there may have been some like political pressure to change doctrines and so forth. I don't think that Ashoka, for example, the Emperor Ashoka, was seeking to manipulate people into submission by forcing monks to change their doctrines, that kind of thing. There's a lot more of that in early Christianity, I'm pretty sure. Or maybe I'm just being naive and just have not been exposed to any evidence for it. And none that convinced me anyway. Like the Buddha being a kshatriya. Anyways, getting back to the main argument though, like what percentage of the Tipitaka, let's just set aside all the Mahayana, the entire huge library of the Mahayana Tripitaka. Just let's focus on the approximately 40 volumes of the Pali Tipitaka. In the Burmese edition, it's 40 volumes because they include some extra text like the Milinda Panya that some Theravada Buddhist countries don't accept as canonical. The Patisambhita Magga, well, I think the Patisambhita Magga is considered, but there's like the Netipakarana is also considered to be canonical in Burma, but it's not considered canonical like in Sri Lanka. Anyways, what percentage of that would be genuine teachings of the Buddha? Well, like I've said before, there's like a spectrum of authenticity. First would be like exact quotes, verbatim quotes of what the Buddha taught. Then you've got like paraphrase. It's not exactly what he said, but it's essentially means the same as what he said. Then you take another step, and it's stuff that the Buddha himself didn't teach, but he would have endorsed it. It would have been in accordance with what he had been teaching. It would be in agreement with what he had been teaching. And then you take another step, and it would be stuff that really the Buddha didn't teach and wouldn't endorse, but he'd just be kind of indifferent. It's like he wouldn't denounce it as being the opposite of what he taught. And then like the other end of the spectrum is just completely made up bullshit that the Buddha would denounce. Just, I never said that. I would not promote that. That is wrong view. So, where do you draw the line? Obviously the last two groups that I mentioned would not be considered reliable teachings of the Buddha. But if you insist on verbatim quotes, probably be like less than 2%. Just you look at the texts, and the third Pitaka, the Abhidhamma Pitaka, is pretty non-controversial among Western Buddhists anyway. The Buddha probably didn't really teach it. Then you've got like ancient commentaries that are included in the texts that are unlikely to be taught by the Buddha. Like, for example, the Nedesa is commentary. It's an old commentary added to the text, or also what is called the Vibhanga, the Sutta Vibhanga, which is an ancient commentary on the Patimokkha rules that, probably that got added later, even though it's so old that it's included in the Tipitaka, it is canonical. And I kind of lost where I was getting to with that. Oh yeah. So, and then like all these fairy tale stories that objective Westerners can't really, talking animals and fire-breathing cobra dragons and all that. A lot of Westerners like me are skeptical of that. So if you get down to like the core texts that were common to all the different schools of Buddhism, not just Theravada, but the other early schools of Buddhism, and then you kind of weed out some of the talking animal stories and all that, the monsters and dragons and so forth, still, you're down to less than half already. But, you can also weed out the ones that really weren't even attributed to the Buddha. You got some nun giving a discourse, or you've got Ananda giving a discourse, that kind of thing. Then that's, it doesn't immediately, cause like a red flag. Like, shouldn't believe that, but still it is at least a yellow flag. So let's just draw the line at paraphrase. Okay, so it's either like verbatim quotes of Gautama Buddha, or at least it's paraphrase of what he taught. Then, even if it's in agreement with what the Buddha taught, but he never taught it, it's sort of like elaborations on what he taught. Then, where do you draw the line exactly? But I have read that the official position of the Vatican since like the 1970s is that the words attributed to Jesus in the New Testament are probably at least 80% bogus. That Jesus probably did not say 80% of the words attributed to him in the New Testament. And I assume most of the bogus stuff is in the Gospel according to John, because biblical scholars, a lot of them anyway, are of the opinion that John, or whoever wrote the Gospel according to John, was just putting his own words into the mouth of Jesus to sort of debunk or refute certain Gnostic sects or heretical Christian sects that were arising in the early 2nd century. And the authors of the New Testament, they had much more of a sense of objective history and accurate record keeping than the Indians of the Ganges Valley 2,500 years ago. So personally, I think in the essay, I came up with a figure of about 10%. We'd be doing well if 10% of the Tipitaka, the entire Pali Tipitaka, were, if not verbatim quotes of the Buddha, at least paraphrasing what he said. And then 90% would, at one extreme would be stuff that the Buddha would have just positively denounced. There's way more of that in Mahayana than in Theravada, like Pali texts. And then a lot of it is just sort of elaborations or making lists, this kind of stuff that I don't think the Buddha would have bothered with. And then there's just legends, all these miracles, all the like devotionalism. Like, so one of the first things that caused me to have doubts about the authenticity of the Pali text, I was very naive when I first became a Theravada Buddhist. I thought that Theravada Buddhists were so conservative, they were afraid to change anything. And so it's relatively pristine. And then I start reading the texts, and there's certain texts that it's hard for me to swallow. Like the Buddha just sitting there bragging in grandiose terms about how wonderful he is and how people should worship him. I mean, it's much easier for me to believe that stuff got added later by devotionalistic Buddhists than that the Buddha himself would be sitting there bragging about how great he is and how people ought to worship him. And then the talking animal stories and all that, or like some of the debates that the Buddha has, where you've got this master debater he's like a follower of the Jains. I don't remember the name of the sutta, but there was this follower of the Jains who had a reputation for being a master debater, and he's bragging about how he's just going to mop the floor with the Buddha in debate. And then he goes to the Buddha and just caves immediately. I mean, he doesn't even put up any kind of fight at all. The first thing the Buddha says, and this master debater just agrees with him and converts to Buddhism. That kind of stuff, there's lots of it in the texts. And I mean, it was that kind of stuff originally that really started me getting like the seeds of doubt or skepticism with regard to the authenticity and reliability of the entire Tipitaka. That was even before I got into Abhidhamma. So let's say 10%. And I mean, there's different schools with regard to this. I mean, you've got the 100% school, which is mostly Asians. They think it's all 100% teachings of Buddha or 100% in agreement with the teachings of Buddha. That's mostly Asians. Then you have like the 98%. And I've met a few of those, even Western monks, who think that the Buddha taught 98% of what's in the text, or at least 98% of what's in the core texts. And that 2% is very flexible. It's like bouncing around all over the place. Talking animal story, okay, that's part of the 2%. And the Buddha bragging and grandiose terms, well, maybe he really did that. Okay. And then it's just flat earth, Mount Meru, all this kind of stuff. That 2% gets used a lot. And then you've got sort of the 50% group, which is the people that reject the core texts. So, yeah, that would be a different group than the 98%. You get rid of the core, you get rid of the extra stuff that is only found in Theravada, and you just get to the core texts that were presumably, according to them, was what was recited at the first council, and it was common to all of the early schools of Buddhism. So that's 50% already, and that's most of like the really fundamentalist Western Buddhist monks belong to the 50% group. But even with regard to the core text, there's talking animal stories and the Buddha bragging about how wonderful he is, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'm down to 10% approximately. So take that for what it's worth. Let's see here. But there is, he does mention down here, let's see, monks seeking personal gain. There's a little bit of that. Like you read the Peta Watu, for example. That's considered to be one of the latest texts added. It's definitely not a core text. It's the ghost stories. And you see that it's mainly people being punished for not making offerings to monks. that they get reborn as a ghost instead of a deva, this kind of stuff. There's lots and lots of pounding away at, you make offerings to monks and you're going to have a good rebirth, and you don't make offerings to monks, you can get a bad rebirth. That's probably like wiseacre monks that are just trying to get more offerings, like coming up with this kind of stuff. And then like he's got another case here of people innocently not being able to remember the teachings correctly, etc. And that reminds me of the rules of monastic discipline, that all monks are supposed to stay in one place during 3 months of the monsoon season. And there's in the rules of monastic discipline, there are cases where you can break that rule, where you're allowed to travel during the rains retreat. Like, your mother or father is sick, for example, they're on their deathbed or something, then you can break the rains retreat in order to go visit your aging, ailing parents. And another one is, there's a person who has who knows teachings of the Buddha that haven't been incorporated into the suttas yet. So it's an old rule. So, but still, it's a lot of stuff gets added that way, where, like, let's say you've got some teacher who gives a Dhamma talk, and it really strikes a chord with people. It might not be really wise or anything, but for whatever reason, people like it, and it starts getting spread around, maybe memorized or whatever. And then finally, there's some monks come across that, and it seems so good to them that they just assume, or maybe it's already been assumed, that the Buddha taught it. It's just people assume that that's so wise, the Buddha had to have taught it, and then it finds its way into the suttas that way. I am sure that some of the stuff in the suttas was not really taught by the Buddha, but was added to the suttas in goodwill, just assuming the Buddha must have taught it. But my short answer, which is too late for that now, is of all the teaching of the Buddha, including all suttas, what percentage would I say is legitimately taught by the Buddha? I'd say about 10%. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. And this is from Rui. And Rui says, did your oneric life change much after disrobing? And oneric refers to dreams. So did my dreams change much after disrobing? But I'm not an oneronaut. So I just wanted to say oneronaut because I've seen that word before. I think it refers mainly to people that are lucid dreamers, that cultivate lucid dreaming, which I've never done. So did my dream life change much after disrobing? I think because I sleep more, mostly I could remember my dreams, and I'd have vivid dreams when I was relatively sleep deprived. Like, I wrote a journal, kept a journal, when I was living under the big rock ledge at the northern boundary of Alondo Katapa National Park, and I was having really long, detailed dreams. And I still have long, detailed dreams, but not to that extent as when I was doing intensive meditation and only sleeping maybe 4.5 hours per night. So, it's just, your mind is just kind of more dreamy anyway, because we have like this physiological need to dream, apparently. And so it was closer to consciousness than now when I sleep more. And I'm a monk in my dreams way less. I was a monk for at least 10 years before I was a monk in my dreams at least half the time. And then sometimes it'd be sort of a borderline case where I'd be like a lay person hanging out with my buddies from high school or something. They'd say, "Oh, let's go and go to McDonald's or something." And I'd say, "Wait, I gotta wrap up first. You gotta cover both shoulders before you go out in public," that kind of thing. So there is that. My dreams seem to be less vivid now. They're obviously less monk oriented now. I dream about like tropical fish, dream about our dogs. That kind of stuff I wouldn't be dreaming about when I was a monk. I had weird symbolic dreams, a lot of airport dreams, a lot of huge building dreams. Sometimes, you got the bad guy chasing you through like an airport or something, and no matter, what you do, he just keeps following you, that kind of thing. Still occasionally have like school anxiety dreams where, you show up and you got to do the final exam and you didn't know that there was a final exam coming. You didn't study at all. Or it's like the term paper is due, and you suddenly realize it's due in like 2 hours and you haven't started on it yet. Or it's like the first day of school and you have no idea where your class is, that kind of thing. I still have dreams like that for some reason. But I did have this kind of a strange, almost dreamlike experience at work just a few days ago. And at work, I often catch myself in a dreamlike state. I'm just like in automaton mode doing my job. And all of a sudden, it's like this higher level of consciousness kicks in. It's just like, whoa. It's just so strange that I'm sort of like a large ant in this large swarming colony of ants doing my job. And then all of a sudden, it's like I take a step back, and it just seems so weird that it's even possible that this is like my version of samsaric reality at present. But anyways, I was at work a few days ago, and I was finished loading up a trailer, and I noticed that somebody had balanced something way up high, way up in the nose of the trailer, like the opposite end of the trailer from where you load stuff. It's way up in the front. And it was pretty obvious that it was just going to fall over. It's like 400 pounds. And if it didn't get strapped to the wall, it was going to fall over, almost certainly. And it wasn't me who did it. I wouldn't be the one who would get in trouble. But still, it's like, I don't want it falling over. So I'm climbing over this freight in like a sauna in South Carolina. And it's just like a sauna in the top of the trailer, especially because heat rises. It's still technically summertime, or maybe around the end. No, I guess it's not summertime anymore. The equinox is already done, isn't it? Anyways, it's still hot. And so I'm clambering over this freight, getting up into the nose of the trailer. And for some reason, I'm remembering how I went camping with my friend Otto several years ago at this point, and he lost his phone. And I don't remember what it was that reminded me of this, but then I finished strapping it to the wall to secure it, come out, get back in my forklift. I'm all sweaty from being up in the sauna of this trailer. I'm going to go get something to drink. And so just eventually, out of force of habit, I just kind of slapped my pocket and realized my phone is missing. And so after just like 5 to 10 seconds, it occurred to me, I was just thinking of Otto losing his phone. So there's a good chance that's where I lost my phone. And so I went and I climbed back up into the front of this trailer over all the freight that was behind it. And I looked down, and there it is. My phone is lying on the floor, 6 feet below, between these big pallets of freight. And fortunately, there was a supervisor there who was skinny enough that he could climb down in there and get it for me. But it was, I mentioned this with regard to dreams because people have dreams that are like trying to give messages to the conscious thinking mind. And so my best guess as to what happened is that my peripheral, like subliminal awareness somehow noticed that I dropped the phone, but my thinking mind didn't notice. And so it was like my subconscious mind is like trying to get this message to me that I had dropped my phone, which is what some dreams do. I mean, it's one of the purposes of dreams. And most dreams are just kind of spam or just, rearranging, processing information you got earlier in the day to help you like categorize it and store it and so forth. I do think that's like one of the main purposes of dreaming. But still, sometimes the subconscious mind will percolate up this message to you through dreams. And it happened in that case, I don't even remember why. I just happened to remember right when I was losing my phone, this friend of mine who lost his phone. So that's kind of strange, but my conscious thinking mind didn't know. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Siovak and Sipad Zidana. And he says, how do you feel about inspiring a young man to become a monk? And I'm somewhat ambivalent. I mean, I certainly don't regret having been a monk for 30 years. I think it was really a blessing to my life. It was one of the main purposes of this life was for me to be a monk. So no regrets at all. I think it was very good that I was a monk for 30 years, even though I'm not one now. But I do remember when I told a certain Zen Roshi that I was planning on becoming a monk. And he said, in very Zen-like fashion, I'm proud of you and I feel sorry for you. Because, it's nothing is just pure good in samsara. It's everything is dukkha, first noble truth. Sabe sankhara dukkha. Everything is conducive to suffering, including being a monk. But it's sort of a more subtle kind of suffering, I suppose. And I mean, in a way, I've kind of run my course as a monk. So I don't feel as enthusiastic about being a monk as I used to. But still, I can see that for a young man, it's definitely a good thing. So I would certainly encourage it. I would endorse it. So if my videos or my writings have inspired anyone to become a monk, then that's good for me. I mean, that's in a way, it's good karma for me, merit, gathering up treasures in heaven, I suppose. But still, it's just helping Dharma along, which is the main purpose for these videos, especially. Even though I'm saying, 10% of the teachings of the Buddha are likely to be authentic, even in the Pali text, you get to Mahayana and we're getting down to 1%. Maybe 2%. But just because the Buddha didn't teach something doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong. I mean, the Buddha didn't teach anything about calculus, for example. That doesn't mean calculus is bad or wrong. So how do I feel about inspiring a young man to become a monk? There's a certain amount of this kind of a lack of gung-ho enthusiasm, while at the same time acknowledging that it's a good. And I'm just going to move on to Siovak and Sipad Zidana's next question. See here. Please explain the meaning of this. And then he's going to be quoting from Majjhima Nikaya number 44, which I didn't look up. I'm just going with the excerpt here. Now, what is the concentration, lady? Now, what is concentration, lady? What qualities are its themes? What qualities are its requisites? And what is its development? And then the lady, probably a nun, an enlightened nun, says, singleness of mind is concentration, friend Visakha. The 4 establishings of mindfulness are its themes. The 4 right exertions are its requisites. And any cultivation, development, and pursuit of these qualities is its development. So I'm guessing that the Majjhima Nikaya 44, I can't remember what they're called. I think it starts with V, but it's a kind of question and answer, very analytical sort of sutta that usually is not being taught by the Buddha himself. It's a disciple of the Buddha, in this case, an enlightened nun, who is teaching a woman. And so I assume Visakha here is, it doesn't have a macron over the second A, but I assume it's referring to one of the Buddha's main supporters, Visakha. Let's see here. So, because it's not attributed to the Buddha, and because it's one of these really technical, listy kind of suttas, I would include that in the 90% that the Buddha didn't teach. Obviously, it's not even attributed to the Buddha. So, with that as kind of a buzzkill sort of intro, let's see, singleness of mind is concentration. Yeah, I can agree with that. It's singleness of mind. It's not so much like one-pointedness as just unification of mind. Because you can have concentration while still being very expanded. It's just that your mind is unified. It's not divided up into parts. Or at least the dividing up into parts is kept to a minimum. It is reduced significantly. So I would agree with that as samadhi. So the 4 establishings of mindfulness are the themes of concentration. Yeah, that I think is sort of debatable. I mean, the 4 establishings of mindfulness is, it's like body, mind, mental states, and dhammas, which are kind of philosophical points, if I'm not mistaken. That 4th foundation of mindfulness, or 4th like setting up of mindfulness, does appear to be somewhat ambiguous and controversial. So, I mean, how is like concentrating on a casino disc one of the 4 settings up of mindfulness? I don't know if that's even included in like the Satipatthana Sutta or the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. So this is sort of, I don't know, it's sort of playing with ideas to some degree, that the themes of samadhi are the 4 Satipatthanas. Yeah, I mean, maybe if I saw the whole sutta, but I might see it in better context or something. But yeah, I think that that is questionable. And then the next part is the 4 right exertions are its requisites. Yeah, I mean, you could say that. The 4 right exertions are, if I remember correctly, to cultivate good habits that you already have, to strengthen good habits you already have, to acquire new good habits that you don't have yet, to reduce bad habits that you already have, and to avoid acquiring any new bad habits. So, yeah, this is just kind of plugged in conveniently here. You could say that it's requisites. You could say with equal validity that other things are its requisites. So, yeah, again, I think that this is sort of a later addition to the Tipitaka, I would guess. And it's just sort of like taking ideas of the Buddha and just sort of like rearranging them and using them in ways that the Buddha might not have used them. And anyways, then the next part is any cultivation, development, and pursuit of these qualities is its development. I guess so. But yeah, maybe I should just look. Just a second. What the hell? Let's see here. Sutta number 44 here. Let's see what it is. 46, 41, 44. Yeah, Vedalla Suttas. So it's the Cūla Vedalla Sutta. Yeah. And it's the lay follower Visakha went to the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina. Okay. Yeah, Dhammadina is the enlightened nun. So, like I said earlier, I mean, if it's not even attributed to the Buddha, then it may be that the author of the sutta had just this enough, like, compunction. Is that a word? Enough scruples not to just put his own ideas into the Buddha's mouth, but he just sort of took a step down from that and put his ideas into the mouth of some enlightened disciple. But these Vedalla Suttas, there's more than one. The Vedalla is just sort of a question-answer format kind of sutta, and they're usually not even attributed to the Buddha, and they show signs of lateness. So that's the meaning of it, in my opinion. And I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the last question. So this is going to be probably less than a 2-hour-long video, which some of you can appreciate. And so this question is from Buddha War Rex 969. And Buddha War Rex 969 says, do you think the assassination of Charlie Kirk has led to a resurgence of Christianity, what I consider to be a Marxist doctrine? Personally, as a liberal right Buddhist, I deeply detest this hypocritical, intolerant Middle Eastern religion. which also wants to spread its poison in Asia. Well, there's a few things before I get to the main question, the main answer to the main question. Let's see. I mean, to say that Christianity is a Marxist doctrine, I mean, that's like saying that Jesus was a Muslim, which some Muslims say, or that the Buddha was a Hindu, which a lot of Hindus say, but it's obviously an anachronism because, I mean, Christianity existed long before Marxism did. However, I would go so far as to say that both Christianity and Marxism are schismatic sects of Judaism. And also Christianity, I mean, it was sort of like the Roman Empire's version of progressivism. You know, it's like you've got the neo-Marxists, the cultural Marxists, the progressives, you know, the SJWs as they were called 10 years ago. Nowadays, you know, they kind of fill the same social niche as early Christianity in the Buddhist time, in like the Roman Empire. So, you know, they've got the same sort of insistence upon like acceptance of others, but only others that agree with you. That if they disagree, then it's just like this hysterical hatred and intolerance. And just championing the weak and the poor, that kind of thing. You know, as the Christians did that and the later Marxists do it. It's just the main difference is, I mean, aside from specific doctrines, but with regard to the main effect, the Christians, the early Christians of the Roman Empire actually did have a kind of moral high ground. Whereas the progressives nowadays are champions of just moral degeneracy and they hate Christianity, mainly because it's like a rival to them. It's like a competitor with regard to worldviews. But also Christianity teaches you should have self-restraint with regard to indulgence and sensuality and so forth. Whereas the Marxists, who have somewhat of a different objective, they're all in favor of moral degeneracy because that helps to undermine like Western civilization, because they want to undermine Western civilization as it exists today in order to replace it with some kind of Marxist utopia. And 100 years of stagnant and failing economies and totalitarianism and even genocide have not persuaded Marxists that socialism just doesn't work very well. Christianity, I mean, they were trying to overthrow the old pagan regime, which they did. And I mean, they just did it with this intolerant zeal in many cases. But still, they did have like morals. Whereas the new left have replaced morals with just unrefined feminine sentiment. Just do whatever you feel like, so long as you don't offend our side. To offend the other side is fine. They're evil and bad and should be, you know, eliminated or in whatever way, peaceful or otherwise. So, I guess that helps to get out of the way. Also, I would not call Christianity itself hypocritical. Some Christians are hypocrites. A lot of Christians are hypocrites, but Christianity itself, I do not consider to be hypocritical. That not all Christians are hypocrites. I've known some very sincere, devout Christians. You know, I mean, they admit that they cannot live up to the standards of Christianity because they're just too, you know, unenlightened or whatever. I mean, Buddhists do the same in that regard. They try to love their enemies even though they may not succeed. That sort of thing. And of course, gather not up your treasures upon the earth is just completely unrealistic as like a religious view for people that have families and have to provide for their family and all that. So let's just get to the main question here, though. Do you think the assassination of Charlie Kirk has led to a resurgence of Christianity? And to some degree it has. Like there's some people, I think Jeremy from a YouTube channel called The Quartering, who used to do videos with Styx, Hexenhammer 666 until Styx was like getting drunk or something on the videos and like passing out. So, anyways, this Jeremy guy says because of the Charlie Kirk thing, it has inspired him to start going to church. And there are a number of people that you see on social media talking about the same thing, how it has kind of caused Christianity to appear in a more favorable light among Americans in general. So, yeah, I do think the assassination of Charlie Kirk has led to some kind of resurgence. I don't think it's going to be just major, but, a few percent more people, like maybe, let's say 2% more people go to church now just because of Charlie Kirk. Maybe. I'm sure it has increased at least a little bit. And, Charlie Kirk is just sort of like a modern day martyr, a Christian martyr. He's not going to be canonized, though, because he wasn't a Catholic. Or Orthodox, for that matter. I think he was evangelical. But it has caused Christianity to appear in a more favorable light. And, I have considered the possibility of, be willing for America to become a kind of, like, theocratic monoculture. The way the West used to be, where, like, I was talking about David Hume earlier. If you weren't a Christian, that was it. That was just cultural suicide. They had cancel culture even back in the 1700s. So, still, it might be worth it for Western civilization in general to just go back to traditional Christianity, even though it wouldn't be good for me because I'm not a Christian. And I wouldn't even pretend to be a Christian. Might just kind of keep my head down and keep my mouth shut about it. But, it could be, I'd prefer that Western civilization go back to Christianity than, like, be forcibly converted to Islam. Or just voluntarily convert to Islam. I guess Indonesia mainly just voluntarily converted to Islam for whatever reasons. So, I say so a lot. You just have to put up with that, I guess. Probably not going to change anytime soon. I guess I have answered the question. Do I think the assassination of Charlie Kirk has led to a resurgence of Christianity in America? Probably not in Europe. But other factors, I think, are pushing people towards Christianity. And just, it's a stabilizing factor. It's a tradition in the West that worked fairly well when it was in power, before it got replaced by atheistic, materialistic scientism. So, there I went saying so again. But I don't think it's Marxist. I do think that Christianity and Marxism are both schismatic sects of Judaism. But, they have certain, like, resemblances. But, and they sort of glorify the weak and the poor. Although the new Marxism is not just glorifying the weak and the poor and demonizing, the strong and the rich, but it's glorifying the dysfunctional. This, like, utter degeneracy is being glorified, whereas just normal, like, healthy-minded people are being demonized to some degree. So I'm still sort of ambivalent with regard to whether the West should return to Christianity. The West is not just going to convert en masse to Buddhism or some kind of neo-paganism, probably. So Christianity does seem to be the obvious go-to for the sake of, like, a stable traditionalist society in the West. But, it has its upsides and its downsides, obviously. Just to go back to the vision of the founding fathers without the slavery would be good. That was what held America together for a long time, is just everyone agreeing on just the ideals of the founding fathers and the Constitution and all that. Although the left now really doesn't have much use for that either. So I guess we're done. I guess so. So, like I always say, no, like I never say, except once, If you have any questions you think I can answer, especially Dhamma-oriented, Buddhism-oriented, especially Theravada or early Buddhism-oriented, then feel free to ask me in the questions or the comments below. I don't know, it must be getting late. I'm getting kind of loopy in my speaking skills. And like and subscribe if you have not done so already. And no more than 3 questions per person per episode, please. And be happy.